Okay, so Gary, do you see the opening slide?
I do.
All right, so thank you all for coming to join us for the DBA In Training Part 2, Know Your Environment and Security with Pamela Mooney. We really appreciate her coming back to do the second part this evening. Coming up in February, it's going to be an afternoon meeting, and it's going to be transitioning to Power BI, a healthcare perspective, and Morelli is going to be joining us. He's a fellow employee of mine over at SSM Healthcare. Here are future data Saturdays and Sql Saturdays that are coming up over the next few months. These are the one-day mini conferences. Some are in person, most virtual. So if you find out if it's in English, you're able to join up and attend throughout the world. So it's kind of cool. You can go to datasaturdays.com or sqlsaturday.com for the complete list. And there's some job opportunities, some more job opportunities over at Save a Lot. Gary's been working a contract over there. So they've got the senior data scientist, a senior data engineer, and a data management specialist. And just go to their LinkedIn page for details.
Yeah, if I could just
Sure.
jump in. And I've been working there for as a consultant for I think about a year, and really have enjoyed working with this team. It's rapidly they're rapidly growing their analytics practice. So they have several data engineers, several data and it's in a Azure, mostly Azure Synapse environment. So great opportunity to get up to speed. They're using things like Azure Data Factory, and they pulling from multiple sources and loading into Azure SQL Data Warehouse. And then I was working on the analytics side, doing Power BI, and also doing, and there's now also a data science team. So these are it's a really great team, good people. Don't sleep on this opportunity if you're thinking about it.
It's great. So again, today's presentation is the DBA Part 2, and it's congratulations, you've got the job, now what? So I'm going to be passing this over shortly to Pamela, but this is the information about the lecture and about her her bio. But what I wanted to go to first is to show you that over on our meetup page, if you go to, and this is probably where you came from to get the link, on the about, if you look here, we've got our recordings are now posted. So this presentation is being recorded, and we will post it later, assuming everything works with our recording. But you would just go here and it would open up over to our YouTube page. So you will see this is part 1 with the spin locks that she did back in September. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Pamela take it away. We will be taking questions at the end of the first part. So you could put your questions in the chat, or we may unmute for the questions.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me back again for this second part in the series. This is DBA In Training Part 2, Doing the Job and Overview. Tonight, we're going to hit on 2 topics, which is environment assessment and security. So we'll probably go ahead and do environment assessment first, and then take a break for questions. And then we'll do the security portion and handle any remaining questions. So this is me. Here's how you find me on Twitter, how you email me, read my writings, and all that other fun stuff. I have been very proud to be a friend of Redgate Redgate did so much to help the SQL Server community, especially in the last year or so, with its lineup of tools, Redgate University, Simple Talk, this past year's free Pass Summit, and access to past materials. So please check out the resources they have to offer at www.redgate.com. All right, so the last time I spoke to this group, it was about what you needed to do to prepare an interview for your first DBA job. So now you got the job. Congratulations. Now what? You might be asking yourself what a DBA does. I'm sure that your friends and family will ask you that question. If you can answer it, you will have taken the first step to success. So let's start there. And this is not a rhetorical question. Feel free to pipe up. Let me begin by asking you a question. What is your company's most valuable asset? Anybody? It's not a trick question, I promise. And
Their
I'm asking,
data.
huh?
The data.
Yes. It is not its money, it's business contacts, it's not the employees, patients, or stocks. It is the data. If the company loses its data, all of those other things take wings and fly away quickly. You, as a DBA, are the guardian and facilitator of the company's most valuable asset, its data. Your job, when it's all said and done, and this is what you say to the friends and family who ask what you now do, is to get the right data to the right people as quickly as possible. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Nothing we do is simple, but you will figure that out for yourself if you haven't already. Today's talk will serve as an overview to help you start wrapping your head around some of the things you need to do when you start a new job as a DBA. I go into all of this and much more depth in my DBA in Training series on Simple Talk, and I include a lot of links for yet further information. Here is the link for that. It's very common to be nervous walking into this job, especially if it's your first job as a DBA. I remember on my first day of work, I was as green as you could possibly get. I was fresh out of school. I didn't even know what a clustered index was yet. I remember the then senior DBA introducing me around as the quote unquote new DBA. With an acute case of imposter syndrome, I said quietly to him after all the intros were made, "Well, I'm not really a DBA yet." Oh, yes, I was. But I needed to grow into the role, and so will you. Expect it to take a good year before you really start feeling like you're getting your sea legs. Expect to work hard. Expect to have some brain burn. But know this, the SQL Server community is one of the friendliest, most helpful groups of people you will ever meet. Start by taking advantage of Stack Overflow, hashtag SQL Help on Twitter, and building your blog role. Getting a mentor to help you along is fabulous. Getting involved with your local user group like this one can help immensely with this. We are very fortunate to have some outstanding DBAs in the St. Louis area. Every once in a while, Paul Randall over at SQL Skills will put out the offer to mentor there. That is the lottery ticket if you can get it, because he used to own the SQL Server engine for Microsoft. There is also a lot of free help out on the internet. My Simple Talk articles will point you to some good, trustworthy resources. Yes, there is a lot to know, but you really can do this. I love checklists for helping keep me on track. So let's get, I'm sorry? Okay. So let's get you a checklist to help point the way. Some of these things you can do concurrently, and in reality, you will. For instance, if you're documenting a server, while you're learning about the databases on that instance, you could and probably would at least take a quick look at what the backup policies are and if the backups are current. We won't get through this whole checklist today, but we'll focus on the importance of getting to know your data estate and having a basic understanding of SQL Server versions, additions, patching, security, and some of their implications. I'll just warn you now, you will never be done with this checklist. Every time you get something close to where you want it, it'll either be time to upgrade or something new will come along that will change your approach. You will relearn your job periodically. For instance, there is a profound difference in the way I deploy database objects to production in the days of DevOps versus how I used to manually do things in the days before change management. Syntax changes or changes in the way we write code have happened. Security is involved. And each release of SQL Server features additions or other changes to its internals. Finally, especially if you're in the cloud, things have changed exponentially. Even, in the cloud, it's even months that it will change over. If you're on-prem, even just a few years makes a big difference. If you're someone who doesn't do board well, you've chosen the right field. We'll be talking about each of these in a general sense during this talk. I want to give you a place to begin the next step of your learning, which will last the rest of your career. By the time we're done today, you'll have an overview of these first two items and will know where to go to get more education on them, as well as some of the rest of the items on this checklist. If you have at least some knowledge of these, you'll be prepared to start feeling a little more confident in your new role. So, I've shown you the checklist of what we'll be covering. Let's talk a little about some free tools you can get to help you along the way. Regardless of where you wind up working, you'll likely have some tools to help you do things like automated backups and monitoring. Backups ensure that the company's data and your job is not lost. Monitoring provides your baselines, so you know what a normal or abnormal day on your instance looks like. It'll also tell you what your instance is doing what and when. Monitoring tells you what's normal, what's going wrong, and helps you quickly find out the reason. If you're going to the cloud, it's indispensable when knowing how to allocate your compute resources. If you should find that your backups are not automated for some reason or you don't have monitoring in place, you get to be the person to suggest it. That's only going to show the company that they made the right decision in hiring you since you caught this stuff and you're working on fixing it immediately. There are quite a few tools that will do automated backups in varying price points. You can look at companies like Redgate, Idera, and the like. The same is true for monitoring. There are tools by companies like, again, Redgate, Quest, and others that will help you, but both tools are essential. If there is no budget for monitoring and backups, there are free options, but this is something that I would fight for when the budget for the next fiscal year is made, because these are the tools that enable you to do your job the best. These ones that I'm going to show you are all free. You can get a hold of Glenn Berry's diagnostic queries at glensqlperformance.com. Glenn Berry is known as Dr. DMV, and for very good reason. His queries are the gold standard when it comes to using the tools that SQL Server gives you to understand better what's going on with it. These queries address any number of possible issues that you could encounter and explains what to look for. And I'm going to show you this in just a little bit. Glenn does a great job of maintaining them. Even if you have a ton of tools at your disposal, you want these. Brent Ozar has a first responder kit that you can get a hold of over on GitHub or get a forwarding link through his website. And they are a set of scripts that will tell you all sorts of stuff about what's going on with your server, what's happening in your cache, the state of your indexes, any problems that it finds, and how to address them. It's open source and people contribute to them all the time over on GitHub. Get registered for it right away. I have lost count of the number of times I have used them. They can really be a lifesaver. Ola Hallengren has something called the maintenance solution on his website, and it is the set of scripts that you want for index maintenance. He also does automated backups and automated check DBs, which are database integrity checks to make sure that there's no corruption, like either in your files or any logical corruption. They are so good that SQL Skills, which is the consulting company that Microsoft uses, SQL Skills subsidizes these. So they are well vetted and well worth your time. And his site includes complete instructions for how to deploy and use them. And I will show you a little bit of Ola too. Finally, DBA Tools is a well-vetted set of PowerShell scripts that allow you to do all sorts of things quickly and easily in SQL Server. If you're not familiar with PowerShell, it would be good to put that down on your list of things to at least start familiarizing yourself with at some point. It doesn't have to become your first language, but it is extremely helpful, and it's hard to do some things without it, especially if you're going to do automation to any extent or if you deal with the cloud. Okay, so you have a checklist and you have some free tools. You ready for this? Let's start figuring out how to know what you're responsible for. Most people will tell you that the first thing a new DBA should worry about are the backups. I take a little bit of a different tack. Don't get me wrong. I think backups are paramount. But if you don't know what servers you're managing, you're not going to know what backups you need to track. So I start there. I would really strongly advise that you make a list of all your instances and all your databases. If it already exists, that's awesome. You just get to help maintain and add to it. If not, you're the lucky person to make it. One thing you can do is ask your server team to help you with this and run a PowerShell script to check for all instances of SQL Server in the enterprise and give it to you. And I mean all of them. You may think that you know all of the SQL Server instances that you have, but because somebody's told you or because you just did this 6 months ago, and you can be wrong. I have seen applications install instances of SQL Server under the hood that were not found until later, and no one knew about them. Sometimes those applications took care of their own backups. What they won't and can't take care of is patching, which we're going to get to in a little bit. Finding these little surprises isn't great, but in this case, you will have caught it and you can add it to your list. Week 1, you rock already. This list, by the way, can take any form you like. You can put it in an Excel worksheet, a database table, OneNote, whatever works the best for you. Once you have a list of all the instances you're going to be responsible for, we'll take the questions one by one and go through them. These simple things can actually tell you a great deal. So we're going to be looking at what environment does this thing live in? Is it on dev? Is it on test? Is it a production instance? Is the instance on-prem? Is it in the cloud? Is it hybrid? Can you get a hold of them? You may or may not right away, but you should at least know that they are there. What version and edition is it running on? This is going to become very important, and we're going to talk about why in a little bit. And then once you've got your instance list, what about the databases? Which ones are like mission critical? Which ones will stop the company if they go down? And should that happen, who do you talk to? These are just some of the things you're going to want to know. All right, so we start by talking about the environments. Each company works a little bit differently, but in general, you'll probably find that users either develop on their local instances or in a shared development environment. The traditional environment goes something like this, although there can be a lot of variation. You start with some sort of development or dev environment. If you hear people say dev, that's what they mean. The instances are usually highly permissioned sandboxes where people can go to create objects and write code and see if it works. From there, if it compiles and everything looks good, they can go on to a testing environment, which is just what it sounds like, a place where people can test their code. This could be the last environment before production, or there could be some sort of QA, user acceptance testing, staging area that's broken out separately. Whatever the case may be, the last environment you hit before production, or you'll hear a lot of people call it prod, should be as close to this production as possible so that developers have a last sanity check before deployment to know how things are going to work or if they're going to work at all. In a DevOps approach, developers usually develop on their local instances. DevOps uses a series of tools and scripts to automate the testing and the deployment to prod for you. DevOps also maintains source control of the code, something that can be more difficult to do in traditional environments. In either case, all roads lead to production, which should be considered the golden source of truth. Different companies have different approaches to implementing DevOps, but if you want to start wrapping your head around it, these are a couple of good articles out there. And when we get done with this talk, probably sometime tomorrow, I will send Julie a copy of the slide deck along with the demo script so that you've got this for yourselves. So nowadays, with the cloud, learning database administration gets to be a little more complex. Your company may be entirely on-prem, meaning nothing is in the cloud yet. Or they may be developing some things in the cloud and keeping others on site. Alternatively, they could be entirely cloud-based. Whatever their scenario is, it's now your scenario. And you will need to know it, how and whether you can access it, and how that particular cloud service operates. If you are a new DBA on a team, you may not get production access or cloud access right away. Still, you should know as much as possible about the SQL Server instances in the data estate for your documentation and add your company's cloud service of choice to your to-do list. You'll fill in more and more information about these instances as time goes on. All right, there's a lot to unpack in this little statement. and we are going to get more into it later. But for now, when I say what version is the instance on, I mean what version of SQL Server. Is it 2019, 2017, 2012, that sort of thing, the major release. When I refer to SPs or CUs, I mean service packs and cumulative updates. SQL Server no longer does service packs, but you'll see them for versions 2016 and older. So you at least need to know that they were once a thing. Finally, when I refer to additions, I mean whether your SQL Server is standard, developer, enterprise, or even express. There are substantial differences in some of these additions when it comes to capabilities. So that is essential to be aware of. Now that you've got a list of the instances and know a little more about them, start looking over the databases. Try to find out what you can about those. To get you started, what kind of applications, if any, are they connected to? What kind of data is stored there? Who owns them? In other words, who is the point of contact for any changes to that database? How critical is it? Or what does it mean to the company if a database goes down? Some are more critical than others, but you'll want to have an idea which ones will stop everything versus which ones are important but not heart-stopping, which are nice to haves, and which ones are rarely, if ever, accessed. This will help you prioritize your workloads later. Let's go take a look at a very simplified SQL Server instance and start seeing what we can do about it. All right, can everybody see my SSMS?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
cool.
Yes.
Cool. Let me get my mouse up here. It's being a little hateful, but all right. So this is just my personal little sandbox, and we're going to pretend like this is an instance that you're getting to on your first day of work. You can see that we've got a few databases here, and we've got some logins. And we're going to start with just top down. What I've got up on my screen right now is Glenn Berry's diagnostic queries. And you will see all sorts of commentary that he puts in these, and he really walks you through it. Starting with making sure that you have the right addition of his scripts. All right. So first of all, we want to know what version and all that fun stuff that this instance is. And we can see that this is SQL Server 2019, okay? I don't see a CU after this or cumulative update. Right away, this tells me I've got some patching to do. When I need to actually update my diagnostic scripts, I'm sure he probably has. There has been a CU 14. So we'll talk about where to go to figure out when cumulative updates, and if you're managing older instances where you can find service packs. So right away, we found something to put on our to-do list. This next query will get you some logical core and socket information. You want this for licensing reasons. Okay, so that if you ever get asked, it's a side benefit. If you ever wanted to know how to read the error log using T-SQL, now you know. This one gives you some of the properties of your server, and it rehashes some of the stuff that we just did, like addition and product version, but it also looks for things like, do you have full text installed? Do you have always on? Do you have stuff like polybase or R or CLR, stuff that's going to probably sound like Greek if you're new, but you're going to want to know it for later on because inevitably you're going to come across some of this stuff. These are configuration values. And what you would do if you were looking at this is put it on your to-do list to look all of these things up and have at least a working knowledge of them. Some of them are more important than others. I mean, obviously, backup compression, I can just tell you as an experienced DBA, that should probably be on unless you have backup software doing it for you. So these are just things to know so that you can tweak them as you come to an understanding of what they do. Query 5, we're only going to go through the first 7 of these, by the way. Query 5 are trace flags. If you have any on, this will pick them up. I don't right now. Trace flags are specific little pieces of code that enable certain behaviors. So there's one that's commonly used that keeps you from logging database backup messages that are successful to your error log. And the benefit of that is you don't, if something goes wrong with SQL Server and you're trying to go through the error log to figure out what that might be, you don't have a lot of white noise to sift through. I don't care if the backup was successful. I care if it wasn't. So there's a trace flag to help with that. It's important to understand these trace flags, to read the documentation. Sometimes they can cause problems. So you never want to just throw a trace flag on in production. You want to do this in a dev environment and test it thoroughly first. This is an example of how to turn a trace flag on. And this is the one I was just talking about that suppresses the successful backups. Don't just run these willy-nilly. All right, query 6, your process space info. This helps you to know if you're under memory pressure. If you get to these guys, the process physical memory and the process virtual memory, and you see a 1 there, chances are you're going to want to drill down a little farther. You've got some memory problems. And again, he walks you through some of this and gives you some helpful links. And then finally, your services. You can go into SQL Server Configuration Manager for a lot of this, but you could do it through T-SQL just as easily. So I really like 1 through 7 for just getting to know your server. 27 is your volume information, how close you are to your drives filling up. I really like that. 35 to 39 are metrics like CPU and IO and things that you're going to use as you're either baselining or finding problems. And then anything specific to the database is query 52 on up. If I sound like I have some of these memorized, it's only because I probably do. I use these all the time. So just cannot recommend them highly enough to you. All right. So we went through, we did our first 7, and this is an example of what a very preliminary list might look like. So in the first list that I've got up here, we're looking just at instances. And just looking at this, a new DBA would have a good deal of information. An experienced one could probably deduce quite a bit more. For example, a more experienced DBA will guess that a dev environment is probably more highly permissioned than production, or I hope it's more highly permissioned. So they might note to themselves to do a permissions review and a vulnerability assessment on the checklist of things to do. I'm going to show you how to do that in a little bit when we get to security. Vulnerability assessment is available on SSMS version 17.4 or later. And it's another great way to make sure that you're aware of things that maybe need to be fixed. I like looking at things from a couple of different vantage points. One may give you something that the other doesn't. They might also be curious about the differences between dev and prod. How often and by what mechanism is that schema and data refreshed? Are data and schema backups taken of dev in case anything happens? Are permissions saved in case a restore is needed? Are the patch levels the same on all environments? This is just stuff that preliminarily goes through my head, I know, when I look at something like this. Versions can tell you a great deal about SQL Server. Version releases usually have important feature additions. For example, SQL Server 2017 made SQL Server available to Linux. SQL Server 2019 gave us help with things like table variables and accelerated database recovery. SQL Server 2016, after the first service pack, made certain things available in standard that you had previously only ever been able to get in enterprise. So there's a lot of other features included in these releases, but that kind of gives you the idea. Sometimes syntax changes also come along with version changes. So for instance, starting with SQL Server 2016, you could use create or alter for things like tables. So I could say create or alter table blah. Before that, I could only say create table blah or alter table blah. And you can do things like drop table if exists. Before 2016, the verbiage for that was a little more complex. It's also more frequent to see changes in functionality or feature additions. All this to say that if you had a dev instance on SQL Server 2012 and a production instance for that same application on 2016, there would be code that worked in prod, but that would break on dev. Or, switch the versions around because you're planning an upgrade and you'd have the same problem in reverse. Knowing the addition will tell you what features are available to you. Books Online over on docs.microsoft.com does a good job of documenting these for supported versions of SQL Server. And if you're sneaky about it, you can go back as far as 2014 by clicking on the 2016 link. Before that, you are probably going to have to do a little Google mining. But this is important information as well. So, I mentioned that after 2016 Service Pack 1 was released, a lot of things became available to standard edition, stuff like partitioning and compression that you couldn't do before. So getting the patching current there can open a lot of functionality to the business, and not to mention it's going to fix bugs that were found before the initial release. An experienced DBA would also know that the 2019 server, being enterprise, has all the bells and whistles available to SQL Server, whereas the standard edition has some features that aren't available. We'll discuss patching in a little more detail in just a moment and find out how to find out if an instance is fully patched. But this gives you a little idea of why I want you to keep this list and why even just this little bit of information is important. To start filling this in, SQL Server versions.com will help. It'll give you all the patching info and information on when end of life support is for all the versions of SQL Server. For the databases, we can see that there are two databases on instance 2. We have really critical DB and archive DB. We can also see that while both are tied to the most critical app, really critical DB is the one we have to be the most on guard for. If something goes wrong with archive DB, of course, we want to get it up and working, but it's not a hair on fire situation. But if really critical DB goes down, the whole business might come to a halt. In either case, should anything happen to either of these databases, we need to contact John Smith and keep him updated on what we are doing and probably get his approvals before any fixes go through. This probably seems like a lot of information, and it is. As time goes on, though, and you get familiar with these environments and databases, you'll add a lot more. That's why documenting your data estate is such an important first step. By the time you have made a list of your instances and databases with even this little bit of information, you're well on your way to better understanding how your business is working, how you can prioritize your workload, and how you can contribute to the smooth operation of data delivery. So, before we go to security, who has questions?
So feel free to type your questions into the chat box, or you can come off mute for the question.
Hey Pam, this is Manish with you, and I would like to ask a little, something which is in my mind.
Okay.
Yeah, I think at the same time, like when we are documenting each and everything, right? I mean, at the same time, somewhere we should have that like the compatibility levels of each and every servers. Like, are in, let's say suppose I'm having a server which is on 2017, okay, but still it's like the databases are in the older compatibility level. That should be also documented somewhere, right? So that we should be aware, like in future we need to change the compatibility level of the databases to a higher level, something like that.
I totally agree. And this kind of falls under the heading of, I said you would add a lot more information. So to those who aren't familiar with what he's talking about, you can change something called the compatibility mode of your databases. So I can be on a 2019 server, and actually, I think I have this in play on my sandbox one, and I have AdventureWorks 2012 operating in 2012 compatibility mode. So what that means is I cannot now, when I am in that database, access the 2019 features. I can only access 2012 features. And that becomes important because sometimes when a new when a new release happens of SQL Server and you're wanting to upgrade, you may have vendors that say, no, we can't support 2019, we're on 2016. And then one of your options is to say, well, can you support us migrating the database, but we'll leave it in 2016 compatibility mode. And sometimes you can get a yes out of them for that, and sometimes you can't. But it is a very important thing to be aware of.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions? That was a good one. All right. Well, sounds like we're ready for security. So once you've made a list of your instances in your databases, it's time for you to know who can do what to your data. Any discussion of security begins with your physical security. Who has access to your physical servers or your data centers? Do they need that kind of access? How frequently is it used and for what purpose? You need this list and you want it to be as small as humanly possible. If there is no list, guess what I'm getting ready to say? You get to be the one to make one. If there is no review system in place, it might be good to suggest that there be policies in place to review this list on a periodic basis and to review procedures for monitoring and auditing physical server or data center access. You should know who has been in your server room, when they were there, why and if they brought anything in with them or if they took anything out. If your physical security is ever breached, your monitoring and auditing procedures will be instrumental in catching the culprit. This is worth the investment of money and time. Now, if you're in a larger company, it's entirely possible that you have a security team or an infrastructure or a networking team that does this for you. My point is this list needs to exist somewhere. If you're completely in the cloud, you may think you're safe. You are not. Even if your servers are not physically accessible, it doesn't mean they cannot be accessed. Whatever your physical or virtual setup, you should do at least an annual unannounced penetration testing to see just how secure your company is. These people that do this are called pen testers, and they're worth every penny because they will show you where the holes are in your security, which gives you the time to fix them, hopefully before trouble really hits. You may think, but I have a small company where everyone knows everyone. What good will that do? Conversely, your company may be so large that you think a pen tester will just get lost in the crowd. So what is the point? You will probably be very surprised in either case. You can easily find stories of employees who, out of politeness, held a door open for the person who just happened to walk in behind them with an armful of stuff, thinking they're a new employee or a cafeteria worker, or not even noticing that they're unfamiliar at all. There's other stories out there of employees who were careless with leaving their monitors unlocked or who left their badges unsecured at their desks. Maybe you heard the one about the person who kept the password to their computer on a Post-it note on the monitor or in the top desk drawer or whatever. Before you think it won't happen to you, know that pen testers are very good at what they do. People are tricked all the time. Just fun fact, I caught a pen tester at our facility and he knew he got caught. And so he started up a conversation with me and casually said, oh, you know, I had trouble getting into this, that, and the other. Do you know, was that really just on-prem? Trying to get me to give him a clue. I mean, he was slick. So understand that when you're reviewing the results, and when you do review the results, and I promise you they'll get in somewhere, do it without name or blame. This is really about improving processes rather than blaming people. However, people do get comfortable over a period of time with a false sense of security. So keeping your awareness high is very key. So data file security. Who can get in your files? So now that we've talked a little bit about physical security, start thinking about your data and log files. Again, you may have other teams who are handling this for you already. If you do, you probably want to know what they're doing. At a minimum, I think you need to know who has access to your data and log files at any level, even if the data is encrypted. What measures are in place to detect and alert you to any unauthorized access into your data files? If you're not aware of these measures, now's the time to start working on them. What about backup files? Make sure that these are protected as well as the data and log files. You can't restore backups if the files are gone or ransomed, so you do have a stake in this. And optimally, have them in more than one place. So think about copying these to another location, think about encryption, think about other options that might be available to you to help secure their safety. You might also need to think about copies of production that might be made for development, QA, or testing. Are backups ever given to developers to restore on their laptops? To make sure that down-level copies of prod are protected, think about using a data masking tool to sanitize sensitive data, or again, whether row-level encryption might be necessary. Additionally, consider whether there is any way to copy data from the company to someone's personal computer. And if you find that's possible, how do you fix it? You want to know what measures are in place to protect against malware, bots, and nasty stuff like that. If your company allows pretty much anyone to download anything they like, the risk of these threats is greater to your network. The best hackers can get in and out with hardly a trace through some pretty stringent conditions, so don't make it easier for them. Be the one to suggest some controls to keep at-risk software out of your corporate environment. So we've talked about your physical servers, we've talked about your data files. Now, let's talk about your SQL servers. There is a very good chance you will find a mixture of instances of SQL Server where you work, and some of them may be very old. This is usually due to what vendors will support for their applications. So you go to the vendor and you ask them if you can upgrade the instance or the compatibility level for their database, only to hear a flat out no. Or worse, if you do that, you'll do it at your own risk. We won't support it. A lot of DBAs go on with life at this point, and they pray they will be ready to upgrade their products soon. The only problem is if you run into trouble on that instance and you have to open a ticket with Microsoft, the first question from the support staff is going to be, well, what version of SQL Server are you running? If you're running an instance that is in support but not current, they'll likely tell you to patch your instance and bring it current. If the instance is out of support, you're on your own. Worse, you're vulnerable. A couple of years ago, there was a bug called Spectre Meltdown. You probably heard about it. It kind of set the IT world on fire. Microsoft responded with patches pretty quickly, but the patches only went back to 2008. If you had a 2005 instance that was not running on a 2008 plus Windows server, you were out of luck. The situation strongly argues for isolating databases for older applications that will not support an upgrade, or for considering the possibility of a different product. Keeping your patching up to date is one of the best things you can do to protect your servers. By saying that, I am not advocating to throw the patch on production the day after release. Start by waiting a week or so after the patch comes out to check for reported issues. If there are going to be problems, you should begin to hear about them online within that period, or you will see that Microsoft rolls out a new patch almost immediately. Then begin with dev environment. And optimally, if you're on a VM, take a server snapshot for rollback if you can. See how things go for a week or so. Then patch test if you have a test environment. Let that sit out there for about a week and slowly move your way up to production. By the time you're ready to patch prod, you've got a well-tested patch. You might be wondering how to know when new patches are available. We've talked about SQL Server versions.com, which is a great resource. I also like SQL Server updates.com for this. This site does a great job of getting you started with patching, and it answers some frequently asked questions. Try to build a patching schedule and stick to it. Your servers will thank you. You don't have to necessarily apply every patch that comes out. You can decide that you're patching, for instance, every couple of months, or you're patching every fiscal quarter, or whatever that looks like. But when you go through your patch cycle, you should use the most current patch that you have. The exception to this is security hotfixes. Those should be applied starting in your dev environment right away and get them up to prod as quickly as you safely can. Some monitoring tools will also help you keep track of updates and the current version of all your SQL Server instances. If you're in the cloud, depending on what offering you use, patching might be taken care of for you. All right, so let's start getting down to the nitty-gritty of security, or, well, at least an overview of the nitty-gritty of security. I'm going to start with an explanation of logins and users and how they work. So we're going to go to the stick figures. Within SQL Server, you have logins and users. Logins are groups, service accounts, or individuals who can get into your server. Users are groups, service accounts, or individuals who can access one or more databases. One login may have more than one username, but they can only use one username per database. If you think of your instance as an office building, your logins are the people who are allowed into the lobby of your building. Your users are the people who have access to specific offices within the building. Or if it helps to make it easier, my legal name is Pamela. Think of that as my login name. But I'm often called Pam at the office. I also answer to mom, honey, sissy, hey you at home, depending on who's talking to me. Those would be analogous to my usernames. So my husband obviously has a different relationship with me than a sibling or a child would. He's much more highly permissioned, but I'm still me by whatever name they call me. It's only their level of access to me that really differs. It's the same with logins and usernames. I might have the login name of Pamela, but a username of Pam 003465, or whatever they decide for it to be. Alternatively, to make it easier to track, some companies would just keep me as Pamela for both my login and usernames. When you get down to it, the names are just for our benefit anyway. SQL Server doesn't care what your login or username is. It cares about something called the SID, the Security Identifier, which is your identifying number in SQL Server, unique to you. So if we're over here on this screen where you see SID 123, it's the same throughout. Doesn't matter what my name is. The SID stays the same. The SID maps the names so that you don't have to bother with pesky numbers and can use names, which are much more comfortable for humans. So, just as you have logins who can access the server and users that can access one or more databases, you also have server level roles that apply to the whole server and database level roles and permissions that apply only to specific databases. Permissions may be given through a role membership or directly to you. Roles allow you to group people together with the same permissions, and it makes it easier to keep your permissions clean. So say if somebody leaves the company, it's a lot easier to take them out of a role than to go through 20 different servers and 500 instances looking for all of their individual permissions. Microsoft gives you some server and database level roles, and you can also create your own if you want. So using our office building analogy from before, maybe one group of people has the permissions to set off the power to the whole building or to set the sprinkler systems on and off to the whole building. Other groups may be able to dictate who has access to a specific meeting room and when. It's really like that. So server roles would be something like a security admin who can assign permissions throughout the whole instance. But a database role would decide who could read or write to just that database. In the first example, my login has no rights to do anything on the entire instance, but the usernames connected to my login can read data in one database, execute stored procedures in a second database, and write in a third. So you can see that up there. In this second scenario, I have the server role of sysadmin. Now I have all the powers. When you have sysadmin, you can do anything. SQL Server sees the word sysadmin and quits asking any other questions right then and there. It would not matter if a security admin specifically denied a permission to me. I could overrule it. Needless to say, you want the sysadmin list to be as small as humanly possible. Roles extend to either an entire server or an entire database. But you can give permissions on individual objects, even down to the columns on tables if necessary. Try to follow the principle of least privilege. There's little point in implementing physical security if the sysadmin list comprises half the company and they can drop any database you have anyway. Really think about this too in terms of who can change the data on your server. So if they have write permissions, they can change the data. If they have permissions like, something like DDL admin, they can create and drop objects, and they can drop it whether they were the person to make it or not. So this is stuff that you want to be aware of and really track carefully. So we just saw that we have some pre-baked server level and database level roles and that permissions may be given through role membership or individually. Granting permissions is easy. Keeping a tight lid on them is not so simple. You should regularly review who can do what on your servers. How often is a matter of how much time you have, but try to set up a regular schedule if at all possible. Security monitoring and reporting can really help you here. Try to be the first one to know if somebody leaves the company, or at least one of the first, so that you can disable SQL Server access. This is not just a best practice, it's a practicality. Disgruntled employees are responsible for some of the worst attacks, so staying on top of this could save you a very bad time later. Starting at the top, do you know who has sysadmin on your servers? Whoever has sysadmin can do anything, like we talked about, including dropping databases and tables, among other things, and covering the tracks. These people could take the business down for a very long time. Brent Ozar calls them the people that can get you fired. There should be a documented list of who's in this role. It should be very small, and it should be reviewed. Sysadmin may be one of the most dangerous permissions, but it's not the only one. The other server-based roles can assign permissions, run anything in SQL Server, spin up linked servers, bulk insert data, manage disk files. You get the idea. Database scoped roles also need careful monitoring, because the people in these roles can still potentially wreak havoc to a whole database. Some roles can manage their own permissions. Others can back up the database and possibly break your backup chains. Still others can remove objects or delete data. Server and database roles are fixed by Microsoft and cannot be changed, but you can create your own roles, put people in them, and more minimally permission those. However you choose to approach this, it's important to understand the implications of access. There are also special roles assigned to the MSDB. This link to my security article will give you more information on all of that and more. In a perfect world, you would only use Windows authentication on SQL Server. Using Windows authentication means that Windows verifies the user's credentials in order to log into SQL Server. It is a safer way to go and what you should do whenever you can. If you're not there yet, then try to minimize the number of SQL Server accounts you have. Enforce your password policies when you make the account and make them change their passwords at least yearly if you can. Disable the SA user if at all possible. Time to start looking back at our instance and some security stuff. One of the first things you can use for this is Blitz. And this little script will output Blitz to a table. In this case, my DBA toolbox. I've got a table called Blitz results. And it will do all sorts of things. Hang on, let me get back there. Okay. Some of this stuff would go into your toolbox, like obviously it needs some log backups. And your CheckDB is over 2 weeks old, and all sorts of things. Cumulative update available. What I want to focus on, though, I wanted to show you that so I can show you this. We're going to look at security. Okay, so right away, I see that the database owner is not SA. That's a problem. The reason that's a problem is because if a user owns this and they leave the company, and that is disabled, that can cause you all kinds of havoc. So we need to change that. We've got some elevated permissions. You want to look at these and make sure they're appropriate. In AdventureWorks, dev user has the role DB owner. That may be okay, depending, you know, on what they're doing there. This looks a little less okay. Test login has the role DB owner. That's my database. Why does test login need to get into a DBA database? These are the questions you should be asking. Dev user has DB owner in master. Positively, absolutely change that. And yes, I did these things on purpose so that you could see some of this stuff. We have auditing going. Auditing is an awesome thing that helps you. Let me see if I can get back to, yeah. Helps you to know who did what, when, where, and why. And in this case, I may want to know who gave permissions for whatever. So I can look at my auditing and I want to check security changes. Oh, I think I accidentally, there we go. I'm going to leave it wide open because I happen to know this is a very small audit. And I can see that this user, me, gave DB owner here and when. Now, whether the audit logs catch this depends on a couple of things. It depends on how quickly your audit logs turn over, because they tend to be like snakes eating their tails. So you may want to log these audits somewhere, or it depends on whether you started auditing after it happened, in which case it's not going to catch it. So, but I wanted you to see, SQL Server audits. They're pretty easy to set up, and I will give the script to Julie as well to kind of give you a heads up on how to query it. Vulnerability assessments are done at the database level. You just go to tasks, go to vulnerability assessment, and say scan for vulnerabilities. And you can store these wherever you want. This will run fairly quickly because these are pretty small. And it caught this. The database owner information in the database should match the respective database owner and master. So if I go, get my, there we go. If I see who is the owner and master, if I go to my files here, it's SA. What's up with AdventureWorks? Yikes, no owner. There you go. They are recommending that transparent data encryption should be enabled. That's really something that you would want to talk about with your company. Permissions to select from system tables and views should be revoked. Totally agreed. And it looks like we don't exactly have a minimal set of principles and low impact database roles. So that kind of leads us to our permissions review. This is something that I adapted from Stack Overflow, and what I did was just throw it in a cursor so it would go server wide and allow you to slice and dice the data however you want. You don't have to have this where clause. You can change it up. This was just what interested me. And we can see now And if we gave any column level permissions, it would show us that too. So I could say, test login, and I can say, you know what? I don't want him to be DB owner in DBA toolbox. And I could do this one of two ways. I could either say, well, if I can get this to work, alter role DB owner drop member test login, like that. Or I could go to the GUI and I could find test login and go to user mapping. And I can uncheck it, or I can, if I just want him out of it entirely, I can just uncheck the box. So that's that in a nutshell, and it's pretty quick, I know, is a way to look at vulnerabilities, assess permissions on a server, and use Blitz to maybe help clue you in. I also like Idera SQL Secure. It's the only application that I know of that does inherited permissions. So if I, Pam, have DB data reader, which means I can read anything on an entire database, but I belong to an AD group called App Devs that can read, write, execute. If you were to look at my permissions reviews, it would just say that I could read, but it would not understand that because I'm a member of App Devs, I can actually do a lot more. Idera SQL Secure will show you that, which is pretty phenomenal. Right. So now that you know who should be able to do what, think about how you will know if someone's trying to do something on their servers that they shouldn't. What if a pen tester tried to get into one of your SQL servers? Would you know? Write jobs that look for failed logins and use your alerts too. I'm a huge fan of Brent Ozar's First Responder Kit. I've talked about that throughout this session. It does a good job of catching elevated permissions and other security related concerns and puts them in a table for you to review. We looked at that very quickly. You can then report or alert on that data to help keep yourself on top of things. If you are not ready or able to buy security monitoring tools, you might check out the Epm Framework. It's a free and easy way to get policies set up in SQL Server and ensure compliance. The Pluralsight has a good course that will walk you through everything you need to know if you should have any questions. Auditing is available, and we took a very quick look at that from SQL Server 2012 and later. If you have Enterprise Edition, you can do database auditing as well. I love auditing because it captures so much information about exactly what happened when, and it's another thing I have used more times than I could count. SQL Server vulnerability scanning is available for SQL Server 2012 and later, and we looked at that. And then again, I think I just touched on SQL Secure. Some monitoring tools will also alert you when an account is added to sysadmin, when you have failed login accounts, and you can set up custom metrics to help keep track of who is on your server and what they are doing. All right. I've just given you a lot of information under the guise of an overview. This is part of the reason that no one can ever know all there is to know about SQL Server. But hopefully it helps give you some things to think about as you settle in, and some pointers that you can use to go for more information when you need it. Thank you so much for having me here to speak. Please ask me any questions you have.
Hey, Pam, this is Julie. I've got a question.
Yeah.
Have you found anything, and maybe it's over in DBA Tools, I'm not sure. I'm being asked, I can give the list of the logins and the membership and the security, but they don't know who DS/J is, the person that's associated with that Active Directory login.
So I think what you may be getting at, there is a thing called original login in SQL Server that you could use. So if they come in by any other name, it drills it down to who they really are. You might look at that. I would imagine DBA Tools might have something on this, but I don't know that specifically.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's something that's been on the back burner. I guess because I know they could always send this over to the Active Directory team to get
Yeah.
the first name, last name.
It would stand to reason that DBA Tools has to have something like this. If not, you might look at the scripting guy. Another resource you could talk to is Ben Miller. Ben is a
DBA Doc.
PowerShell rock star. He might have some ideas if you can't find it any other place.
Yeah, he's DBA Doc, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that. And then my other question is looking at, I have a script that tells me when was the latest backup for a database, and it will show, like maybe you have a maintenance plan that doesn't do all user databases for a specific reason. So somebody adds a database and all of a sudden it's like, hey, this database isn't being backed up. But I was wanting to do something where I can feed it a list of the servers and instances, and then have it run the query against all of them.
Probably. So if it's instance specific, you could throw it in a cursor. That might be the easiest way to do that. But if you're going against different instances at the same time, you have a couple of options. If it's an ad hoc thing, you can multi-script it. If it's more of a scheduled thing, you could use PowerShell. And then I forget what, why, and I'm not going to be able to retrieve what it's called, but there is a way in PowerShell. Is it invoke SQL? I think it's invoke SQL. You might check, but you pass the SQL command, and then I think from there you should be able to pipe it out.
Okay, yeah, I saw something about SQL command. I haven't been able to find the time to go into that further, and I think I had found some of that information out on the DBA Tools.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess still another way you could do it if you didn't want to get into PowerShell, that's not your comfort zone, you could just do an agent job on each of your instances to go out and get it, put it in a table that you can query, and that's another, or even output it. Does that help?
It sure does. And do you have problems with your auditing files just getting really big or not, or being able to grab them?
So it can be on a really busy server. What we do is we limit the number of files, but having said that, we import them. And so we take the auditing files and we import the audit data into a database. You can use SSIS to do that. You can use a number of modalities, but I would say SSIS is by far the most efficient because you've got the wide open pipes of integration services running under the covers, not being as disruptive to your server resources. I would say that the caveat to that is to have a archiving system or a system to allow some of that data to flow off, so in other words, define your retention period. Otherwise, that database could get very large very quickly and only grab the stuff that is truly meaningful.
That sounds great. Thank you. Wonderful presentation and
great
explanations, because you start with the beginning and got more into the detail.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions? Feel free to come off mute.
Sure. Yeah, this is Manish again, Pam. Pam, can I go a little back into this same discussion where Julie was asking about, Julie, were you asking about the group membership of an AD&T group? Like who all, like, out of, let's, say suppose your company is having, your team is having, say suppose 20 to 200 people, okay, and out of that 200 people, say suppose 100 people are in, say suppose a development AD&T group. So you want to know the exact name of the people on that development group.
So if you're just wanting to get the, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so usually usually Julie and Pam, right? Whenever such kind of situation come, I used to use that XP login info command, and when we put the AD&T group, it tells us like the exact number of peoples on that group.
Oh.
Yeah, XP _ login info.
Okay, thank you.
And also there is like one other command. Let's say suppose I am a developer and I don't have an SA access, right? Because this XP login info needed elevated permission. But say suppose I'm a developer and I want to know like who all are my teammates on my AD&T group. So that time I simply go to that file explorer in the Windows this thing. What you have, our Windows laptop. And there, when you simply go to the network and search for this thing, simply click on the network and search Active Directory. Just put the Active Directory name. It will pop up. It will make a pop up and it will show you each and every members from the AD&T group. That's the other way.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Pam, I do have one question for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Say suppose as I was talking about like the AD&T group, right? So suppose I am a part of AD&T group, okay, and that AD&T group is having a reader and writer access, okay. And then I am also a part of other group where I have just a reader access. So which group will get the priority? Which group will have the priority? The group where I do have a read and write access, or the group where I belongs just to have a read access? So like whenever I will connect to that particular server, can I have the ability for write as well? Because I do have I do have more access into the server. With the other group, or the least will get the priority.
So you cut out a little bit on me, but I think you said that if you're a member of one group that has read access and another group that has read write access.
Correct. Yeah. Both on same server. Yeah. Both groups belongs to the same server. And if I log into the database, okay, so can I have the ability of like the group? Will the group which have like more access will get the priority, or will the group which has less access will get the priority?
So if you have read access through one group and read write through the other, you have read write.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and that is the reason, that is one of the reasons why I was talking about SQL Secure, is because the idea of inherited permissions. So say I was the DBA in charge of this. I did not give those permissions to you directly. So,
Okay.
a DBA who may not know to think in those terms might look at him and look at your account and say, they're fine. When in reality, because you're a part of this other group, you could erase data out of that table or any number of
Exactly.
tables because it's a database wide role. And so, it can be very important to understand who gets permissions through a role.
Agree. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Ma'am. Yeah, I agree with you. Thanks for clarifying.
Sure.
Any other questions? Well, Pamela, thank you very much again for presenting part 2 of the DBA, becoming a DBA, and this was really wonderful. We'll work on getting this posted out to our YouTube channel, and we're still working on having a location. We have a location for files. We're just running into some permissions issues. So I'll work with Gary on getting that resolved so that we could post the scripts and slide decks. So thank you everyone for joining in this evening. We really appreciate it. And don't forget, Tuesday, February 8th from 12 to 1:30, we'll have our next lecture on transitioning to Power BI, a healthcare perspective.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Enjoyed it.
Thank you all.